Hello everybody and welcome to this webcast for parents and carers. My name is Lucy and I'm the Education Coordinator for the Kingston and Richmond Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I'm joined here today with my colleague Daksha, Graham from the Met Police and Kate, who works in public health. We're here today to talk about an issue that a local mum from Richmond very clearly describes here.
Hi Lucy, thanks for inviting me to speak today. I just thought it was important to explain what happened to my daughter just a few weeks ago when she was invited to a 14th birthday party of a classmate. She attended the party, she got there at 7:15, very quickly realised that there was alcohol being consumed. There were no parents and discovered a lot of the children were smoking, they were vaping and they were smoking weed, not just cigarettes. She actually texted me and came home. She didn't feel safe, she didn't feel comfortable, and she was actually quite shocked, as were we. And it's just quite alarming that this is happening so regularly. Children are throwing parties, parents aren't attending, drugs and alcohol are being taken and consumed.
So what is it exactly that we're worried about in Richmond and Kingston? We're in a situation where we have laws that are confusing. We believe that children in our boroughs may be at risk of harm, and there is also evidence of parents having quite liberal views around drug and alcohol use. Certainly secondary schools tell us that there's always a popular house in the year group where children like to gather. And, you know, it brings to mind the really tragic case of Tyler Peck, who was a 15-year-old who died in Devon in 2019. This was quite an extreme case because his mother actually provided him with drugs and alcohol. And, you know, she was sent to prison quite rightly. But the judge in that case said something that really resonated with me. And that was that she had a misguided pride in her house being the popular one for teenagers. Alcohol laws are quite confusing. Graham, would you like to tell us what the law is?
Most people probably know them. So it's illegal for somebody under the age of 18 to buy alcohol. It's illegal for you to sell alcohol to somebody under the age of 18. But it's also, from an adult point of view, it's illegal for you to buy or try and buy alcohol for people under the age of 18. And in most circumstances, it's illegal to buy and drink alcohol on the licensed premises. They're the very basic laws around alcohol and juveniles.
Thank you, Graham. And that seems pretty clear, but it does get quite confusing because if you're 16 or 17 and accompanied by an adult, you can drink but not buy beer, wine or cider with a meal. And if you're under 16, you may be able to go into a pub if you're accompanied by an adult, but it depends on the particular conditions for that premises. The law states that it is illegal to give alcohol to children under 5. Kate, you know, is it okay for children to drink alcohol?
Well, the Chief Medical Officer recommends that young people should wait until they're at least age 15, and an alcohol-free childhood is really the best way to go. This is because using alcohol regularly has health implications such as an increased risk of several types of cancer, heart disease, liver disease, pancreatitis, stomach problems, weight gain, and a whole host of other health issues, not to mention the immediate and life-threatening risk of alcohol poisoning if a person consumes too much on any one occasion.
As you can see, alcohol consumption in Kingston and Richmond has contributed to some very serious incidents. This particular case is very sadly of a boy that died last year, but he's not the only one. And, you know, the NHS website says alcohol poisoning is a leading cause of poisoning, especially among young people. Daksha, what do you think?
I think that it is an issue. I think we do all need to be thinking about how much alcohol children are drinking and the impact of it on their physical health, but also their mental and emotional well-being. I was going to ask Graham a question about the law. Where does the law stand if a child under 18 suffers from serious alcohol poisoning, ends up in hospital, or eventually even dies? Where does the law stand if that's happening in your home?
Yeah, so allowing children to gather unsupervised with alcohol can be a form of child neglect, especially if the child is harmed or dies as a result of consuming the alcohol. So if you are a parent that allows that, for instance, then you could actually be charged under the Children and Young Persons Act with child cruelty. So you can get prosecuted, or social services can get involved. Worst case scenario, you could even have children removed from you.
And if children are bringing in alcohol without the parents' knowledge, would that still apply?
Yep, so the neglect still occurs when a particular parent fails to protect a child from physical or emotional danger. Also, if you fail to ensure adequate supervision, so if you're allowing your children to use the home and you're going out, and also if you fail to ensure access to appropriate medical care or treatment. So yeah, they can still be liable.
Kate, what actually happens when someone drinks too much alcohol?
Okay, so the same amount of alcohol has a much greater effect on the body and organs of a child or young person than on an adult. And that's because their bodies, especially their brains and liver, are really still growing and developing. So alcohol poisoning is dangerous and needs immediate medical attention. So all these things add up to make alcohol quite a dangerous thing, particularly for children to be partaking in.
Thank you, Kate. And I'd really like to introduce you all now to a young man called Oliver, who's a 17-year-old sixth form student in Richmond. And he has spoken to me really openly and honestly about his experience growing up as a teenager in the borough.
Hi everyone. Since I was in year 8, I've seen young people drinking alcohol in parks and at parties, and by year 9, weed started to emerge amongst a few, and in year 10 it really became the norm. Also, nitrous oxide became a bit of a craze. By year 11, it was definitely the norm for everyone to smoke weed, and so harder drugs such as cocaine, ketamine, and ecstasy started to appear. I've seen people I know completely off their heads and out of control, including myself. Since I'm not 18 yet, I use my older brother's ID so I can get into pubs and drink. Most of my friends have fake IDs. If you don't have an older sibling, you can just buy an ID. It is really easy to get into pubs.
Thank you, Oliver. And do young people understand the dangers and the risks of drinking alcohol and taking drugs, do you think?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, when you're young, your parents are always, reminding you of the risks of drugs and alcohol, but when you go to parties and alcohol is there, if you're in year 9, if you're young and alcohol's there and everyone's drinking it, you think to yourself, well, it can't be that bad if everyone else is doing it. And it's possible that later on, when you're older, perhaps when you've got exams coming up, it might be a stress thing, but I don't think that's so much the case when you're, in year 8 or year 9.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And Oliver told me that he started with drinking cider in year 8 along with his friends, but it isn't weak. Some ciders have up to 12% alcohol content.
I think the issue around children drinking alcohol is obviously the health issues we've talked about, but also the impact it has in terms of decision making and risk taking. I think for children and adults, if you've had a few drinks, you're likely to become less inhibited. You're more likely to take risks. You're more likely to think nothing awful can happen to you. That's just what it does to you. And I think with children, particularly teenagers, and that teenage brain who wants the excitement, wants to take more risks, once there's alcohol in the mix, it can lead to situations that are potentially dangerous, harmful to themselves, harmful to others, and that can escalate really quickly.
That's right. And another sort of layer of concern is that environments with no supervision by an adult, unfortunately, are contexts that can also enable harmful sexual behaviour.
Yeah, so on that, so in spring of 2021, following the tragic death of Sarah Everard, a lady set up a website called Everyone's Invited, and people were invited to put on their experiences of sexual assault or harassment that they'd had. And that website very quickly became swamped with disclosures from school children revealing the sexual abuse and assault that generally happened at unsupervised gatherings outside of school, which involved alcohol. And many of the testimonies, shockingly, come from within Richmond and Kingston. 32 local schools were actually in that report.
That's right. And the government was so concerned by the prolific number of disclosures on the Everyone's Invited website that they asked Ofsted to conduct a review of sexual abuse in schools, which was published last June. And it reveals that many of these behaviours have become normalised, such as sexist name calling, homophobic language, unwanted touching, and that because of this, children are not reporting these incidents.
And the issue when inappropriate sexual behaviours become normalised, that creates an environment where things can escalate. And what we know and understand is that sexual behaviour exists on a continuum. And then if you add alcohol or drugs to this mix, things can escalate very, very quickly and can make children vulnerable and cause harm either to themselves or others.
No, I was going to say just that the one blue are some of the testimonies, but they just form a very tiny proportion of how alcohol and drugs can play a part. We're not saying that if your child goes out to a party, they're going to always get harmed. It's just that when harm does occur, usually alcohol is involved.
Yeah, and the bit in green is a bit about the reminder of the importance of good quality relationships and sex education, which most children receive in school. But parents can also play an important and an active role. So while it might feel embarrassing or uncomfortable to talk about sexual health with your children, it's a really important conversation to have. And what we know from the evidence is that good relationships and sex educations, that the evidence shows that actually children who've received that and had those conversations actually report sexual abuse if it happens to them. They delay sex until they're ready to do so. They're more likely that their first sexual intercourse is consensual. They are more likely to use contraception and condoms and less likely to have an unplanned pregnancy or a sexually transmitted infection. So talking about relationship, sex, alcohol and drugs with children is a really strong protective factor and will help those young people to navigate situations, including unsupervised parties.
Just a reminder that the Chief Medical Officer says that an alcohol-free childhood is best for health. And, the reason we want to communicate with parents is to, to really alert them about what's going on when our children gather and to support them to minimise harm from unsupervised gatherings and parties.
And it's never too late to talk to your children about what's going on in their lives. Just by saying those things could make a difference to a young person's safety. Yeah,
and knowledge is power. So from what you've heard today, you'll be more informed on what young people may do when they gather and in a better position to act well. So always find out what's going on, who's going to be supervising the gathering, contact them to find if alcohol is going to be there or if it's going to be supervised at all. And just feel free to express your concern that children are too young to drink alcohol. I know peer pressure is very powerful from other parents, but don't give into it, because if we give into it at this stage of parenting, then the next cohort of parenting won't feel empowered to stand up to it either. And we really do need a cultural shift, because we're finding that people that, children as young as 13 or younger are drinking. That should really be the case. It shouldn't be allowed.
Thank you, Graham. And, I think you're right. We need to sort of create a sea change, and that's partly why we're making this webcast. So, it's quite easy to ask those questions and to be informed and to know that when your children move into secondary school, it's quite likely that, parents might have returned to work and may not be present and monitoring what's going on. Obviously, gatherings in the park after school are much harder to monitor, but you can talk to your children about the importance of looking after one another and to seek help if one of their friends has had too much to drink. No adult ever is going to be angry with the child that's seeking help. And, there are lots of resources at the very end of this webcast, to support you in having those conversations. And please don't be afraid to talk to your children about staying safe in their lives. For some young people in our boroughs who have tragically lost their lives, their loved ones will not get the chance to have those conversations now. And, please don't wait for your child or for someone to be a hospital or police statistic. I'd like to really thank everyone for their contribution. Thank you to Kate from Public Health, my colleague Daksha from the Safeguarding Partnership, and to Graham from the Met Police for joining us. And an especially big thank you to Steph and to Oliver for their really valuable personal insights. But most importantly, I would like to thank you, the parents and carers, for working with us to collectively protect young people. Thank you very much.